Welcome to our presentation on functions and features on data protection. My name is Volker Lehnert. I'm Senior Director Data Protection and Privacy for SAP S/4HANA. I would like to talk today about GDPR and the Californian Consumer Privacy Act. As you might know, in January 2020, CCPA will enter into force in California. The remarkable part about CCPA is that it's highly comparable to GDPR, at least in technical terms. So if you are prepared for GDPR, my humble opinion, but I'm not a lawyer, would be you are prepared for CCPA. Quite simple. But actively, if you have been prepared on data protection and privacy according to the legislation in Europe since 1996, even GDPR was not a challenge for you. So we do have a comparable set of technical requirements when we are talking about most existing data protection and privacy legislation. We, SAP, are trying to keep up what is available in the market on legislation and check, are our features matching or not? We assume they are currently matching, besides some specific ones like the Chinese cybersecurity law, where, in my humble opinion, data protection is more about protecting technically data, but the data subject rights are not as relevant as in Europe or in California. The typical disclaimer, forward-looking statements and so on. And additionally, some people might know me from the past. There's always a personal disclaimer. The personal disclaimer is simply SAP is not providing legal advice. I am not providing legal advice, and even worse, I'm not a lawyer. So all what we are sharing here are assumptions, interpretations, how we consider certain things. You and your legal teams might have completely different insights. It's up to you. But to understand what we are doing, therefore you have to understand with which assumptions we have been implementing data protection and privacy features. The presentation has been prepared from a colleague of mine this time, so we have 60 slides in 60 minutes. I will have some shortcuts to make it a bit faster. Every one of us has a different way to present such things. So we want to talk about our view on GDPR, on the processing of personal data, legal basis, considerations. We want to talk about the rights of the data subject, again the legal base, considerations. We would like to talk about classical security safeguards. We would like to talk about purpose differentiation, then touching California Consumer Privacy Act, presenter's view again, consumers' rights, SAP Business Suite and S/4HANA, some technical features like Simplified, blocking and deletion, information retrieval framework, read access logging, and finally we would touch also at least partially what we are doing for data protection and privacy in our SAP Cloud Platform. So, some of you might know these slides already. Data protection is extremely simple. Processing of personal data is forbidden. So I can leave now, but we can go ahead as long as no justifying reason is given, such as a contract, other legal reasons, or the data subject has given his or her unambiguous consent. That's important to keep in mind. In the first step, it is forbidden. And only if you have a purpose based on a fair legal requirement or option, you are allowed to process personal data, but only as long as this is still applicable. This is effectively in Europe law since latest 1996. So no customer has, for instance, HR systems with 30 years old records. For sure not. Personal data. What is personal data about? Personal data means any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person. I explain the concept always with two examples. Formally, all our companies in Europe are into equal career and equal pay. Still, we do have companies where with 2 attributes a woman is identified uniquely: senior management and female. So in all our organizations, we have areas where only single women are really on the highest career level. And this is the identifying, so it is personal data. The other example I'm always using is among 100,000 SAP employees, you will find, as far as I know, only one stupid guy wearing colored suits like the one I'm wearing. So one attribute. And you might consider that SAP has not too many data protection experts. So with these attributes, I'm identified among 100,000 employees of SAP. And that's important to understand the concept of personal data. It is not only Volker Lehnert and everything what is related to Volker Lehnert. It starts with the opportunity, I met that fancy guy on TechEd and he was wearing colored suits and he was a data protection specialist. Honestly, I have customers not remembering my name, but asking among customers, do you know that guy? So they talk about personal data. Yeah. Unfortunately, the suits are part of my effort to explain data protection and privacy, but my company still is not paying the suits, so that could get improved in future. Bringing it a bit more down, so personal data is for sure name, postal address, telephone number, email address, national identifiers, IP addresses, MAC addresses, license plate numbers, membership numbers, everything what helps to identify a single person. And the user ID is personal data. The business partner ID is personal data. There is no discussion worth about such simple facts. In S/4HANA and SAP Business Suite, well, you do have the business partner, the BP ID as mentioned, already personal data. Very often I have the discussion even internally, it's only a number, it's not reflecting a person. Unique assignable contract IDs, orders, sold to parties, delivery with delivery addresses, invoices, payments, all that is to be considered, up to my humble opinion, but I'm not a lawyer, as personal data. And that's the way we implemented data protection and privacy. So we have gone through a very large scale of data to ensure that you could handle that data as personal data. Here are some more definitions. The data subject is the natural person to whom the personal data relates. There are some exemptions, for instance, in Austria, in Switzerland, in Czech, where also legal bodies are considered having data subject rights. We do have the data controller. It's a natural or legal person, in our context mostly legal person, that determines the purposes of the data processing. There is no such thing like SAP when it comes to GDPR. SAP is not a controller, never ever. SAP is a group of companies with more than 169 legal entities, and each of them is, up to my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, is up to my opinion an own controller in the scenario. This is very important when you talk about processing in a group of companies. Even if GDPR contains certain privileges for a group of companies, it's still important to understand I have a contract with SAP SE. And if my colleagues in SAP Switzerland want to see my data, they need an own legitimate purpose. Data processor is the next important term to be kept in mind. If you go to the cloud business as a controller, the company providing the cloud service acts as the data processor with own obligations to follow, but Final responsibility remains for sure with the data controller. Yeah, processing of personal data. You need to have a legal basis to process personal data. And there are 6 defined in the legislation, and there are no others. The first one seems to be the most easiest one, the consent. Consent is quite challenging when we talk about the consequences. Consent is only to be given in a situation where the data subject is completely informed on the purposes, on the data, on the recipients of the data, and the purpose must be given based on the free decision of the data subject. So you're regularly not allowed to bundle consent with other things. And in some areas, consent doesn't make any sense at all. For instance, at SAP, we are using CATs for time reporting internally. Yes, it's processing of personal data, but SAP shall not ask for my consent, because I do have a contract with SAP. And the processing of my time recording is based on the contract and not on the consent. If it would be based on a consent, I could revoke my consent with the consequence that the data potentially would have to be deleted immediately. So don't go with consent. Consent doesn't add any value. In our case, most business done in S/4HANA or SAP Business Suite is based on contracts. When we talk about marketing, there we are adding opportunities for consent. So contract, as discussed, is the most common reason to process personal data. The next one are legal obligations. If I do have the clear legal obligation to process personal data, I do not need any other reason. Usually I do the joke that I went to my HR department and told them, stop the processing of my personal data, the transfer of my personal data to the fiscal authorities. It's my personal data. I don't want you to tell the tax authorities how much money I earn. And they told me, nice try, Volker, but we do have the legal obligation because there's tax legislation in place. We have no chance then to report on your financial situation or your income. We do have the protection of vital interests. This is regularly in S/4HANA, SAP Business Suite. Specific case, well, if you run a healthcare solution like our hospital solution, then obviously you are dealing in some situations with the vital interest of a person. If you are dealing with our solution, environment, health and safety management, industrial hygiene, well, if you collect data on an accident which is happening on your ground with personal data, there might be also vital interest in place. We do have the public interest, which is usually, again, ruled out by several legal acts into the member countries, and we do have the legitimate interest. Legitimate interest is also challenging with different technical consequences. If I back processing on legitimate interest, the data subject can act against the processing, and then I'm in the situation to prove that my legitimate interest is effectively overruling the interests of the data subject. So there are a lot of pitfalls, technically, but also legally. I would assume most legal cases in data protection and privacy will relate to the so-called legitimate interest. Here we do have some more words, and what do we provide as SAP? Well, consent, we do have effectively marketing permissions in SAP CRM. We do have a very small consent administration in SAP S/4HANA. We do have on SAP Cloud Platform a consent repository, and we have our SAP customer consent, which is included in the C4 world, where consent adds a lot of value, because in C4 we are dealing with marketing things, and there it's always a good idea to have a consent before you send a newsletter on your news products. Contract, as stated, is the standard use case, and you have hundreds of opportunities to prove the existence of a contract into SAP. And finally, this is also part of our purpose checks. You might also consider GRC solutions to document all this, but this is how we deal with the legal reasons. Let's talk about the rights of the data subject. The first and most important one is the prior information of the data subject. So when you start the processing of personal data, you have to inform the data subject on the purposes of the data processing, on the categories of data, the categories of recipients, and this is obvious. Only if I know that you are dealing with my personal data, I can use all my other data subject rights. The next important point, and this is where customer pain starts usually, is the right of the data subject to receive information on the data undergoing processing. And this is already the area where we have the most legal cases so far. How far is the right to be fulfilled? In which granularity? What is to be discussed in that as personal data, where the data subject has the right to have access to that information? The next topic is about automated decisions. Automated decisions have been already part of EC 9546, where automated decisions have been not allowed. Now GDPR states clearly automated decisions are allowed as long as the data subject has the right to object the result. So what I'm talking about is you have in a lot of business processes automated decisions. If you go to your bank and ask for a loan to build a new house, then automated decision usually is happening because there's a credit profile which is used by the bank, and if you have a bad credit rating, no else discussion is done. You will receive, oh, sorry, Volker, you will not receive. Effectively, I'm allowed to say, oh, challenge that decision, dear bank clerk, and as long as he has an opportunity to overrule the automated decision, the customer is on the safe side. Dear Volker, I am checking your request. I see still your bad credit rating, but now I decide manually that you will never ever get a building loan. Just an opportunity to check that everything is okay. The next right is something where we are quite challenged. The data subject has the right to get handed over all data in relation to him or her which has been collected interactively. We will highlight potentially later on a bit on that challenge. We do have blocking and deletion requirements, erasure of personal data. This is something my colleague Ivona Luther, also in the room, is iterating on TechEd again and again, how to handle blocking and deletion of personal data. Effectively, in my impression, there are a lot of customers who have not been starting blocking and deletion of personal data and systems. And you should be aware of that this is something the supervisory authorities are also aware of. So we do have supervisory authorities clearly stating we will check how you are deleting personal data. The right of restriction is the right that I can ask as a data subject that the processing of my data is restricted, but the data is kept available. And accuracy is the next important requirement when we talk about rights of the data subject. And there's a logical link to automated decisions, and that's the reason why it makes sense to have the right to object automated decisions. If I realize that you have a credit profile from 20 years ago on me, then I can request that you correct my credit profile because I have a new one from the same credit rating, and the decision might change afterwards. Again, some words on the content and the possible technical features. The information to be provided before the processing starts can be logically structured from the information retrieval framework. The information retrieval framework is designed to fulfill the data subject request, but really manually, if you compare such requests, you can learn what usually is processed and can use that information to fulfill also the prior information. Accuracy is a standard functionality, but sometimes challenging. If you have a posting on a lot of non-German people always call me Lehnert. No, I'm not Lehnert, I'm Volker. And if someone has been writing in my business partner the second name as my first name and did afterwards a posting, you cannot easily correct the data because you have a posting, and the posting must be available all the time. Yes, you can do a reposting, but still the original posting must be kept available as long as financial retention periods are applicable. So there are some challenges still. It's a standard functionality that you can correct data and personal data, and automated decisions, yes. Sorry, accuracy war ich. Erasure and erasure is stated. We have several functionality to support this. We do have basically the SAP Information Lifecycle Management, which is, if you use it for the deletion of personal data, part of your license. So it is not completely covered, but you can do with ILM everything within the license as long as you do it for GDPR or other applicable data protection legislation. Within ILM, we do have meanwhile a data controller rule framework. We provide end-of-purpose checks and blocking indicators. This has been an area where we had very high effort to implement this, because it's not about deleting data. It's about deleting data consistently. So I met customers 5 years ago who received a request from a data subject to delete my data. And what have they done? They went directly to the database and deleted the data. And afterwards they had what? Inconsistent data in technical means, but also in legal means. So that's blocking and deletion of personal data. We do have the portability requirement. IRF supports this, but there is still a challenge with the portability requirement. You know by heart that if you get the data out of an SAP instance, you wouldn't be able to propagate it to another SAP instance, because the data is depending on configuration. So yes, we can drop out what information we do have, but no other system can use it, as long as we do not have industry standards. And this is something I'm hoping for, that for instance in the banking area, the banks are constituting a standard how such data shall get handled, that we can provide the data in a format readable by another bank. Still, we are legally compliant in terms of avoiding liability. Yes, we can provide the report even if no one can use it. Restriction of processing is more or less included in the blocking and deletion procedures and automated decisions. Yes, we provide automated decisions an opportunity to overrule that decisions. Let's talk about security safeguards. We do have classical security safeguards, you know potentially better than I do. You have to implement according to Article 32 GDPR security safeguards according to the risk. Just a side remark, when we talk in GDPR about risk, we talk not about the risk that you as a company have. We talk of the risk a data subject has. And that's a slightly different perspective. And that's what the supervisory authorities will also judge on. What is the risk for the affected person? Based on that risk, you have to implement technical and organizational measures, more or less state of the art, to ensure that the level of protection is meeting the demands and risks of the data. You should start, obviously, with physical access control. Most companies I know do have a batch system that is a physical access control. Most of the companies I know, meanwhile, have printers where you have to identify yourself before you get the printout. So this is all about physical access controls. We do have authentication procedures. In SAP, there are standards like TechEd. We do have very well implementable authorization concepts. When we talk about personal data, you have to consider the authorization concept. I have been, before I started, to focus only on data protection and privacy authorization consultant, and I know that until I left the field, no customer has been caring for data protection and privacy in authorizations separately. So I suggest, I left consulting 2011. I know that the world has changed and all customers will have well-implemented authorization concepts covering the needs of data protection also and not only of financial segregation of duties. We have to talk about disclosure control to ensure that certain potentially sensitive personal data, you can check whether someone has been accessing this. We talk about change control. Well, always a good idea. Who has been that stupid idiot using Lehnert as my first name and not as my second name? We do have the requirements on transmission control, and there a very hot topic always is the discussion on RFC connections. If you're using an RFC connection to the outside, you have a data transfer. And you should have a purpose. And you should have a system in place considering that only the right data is transferred to the receiving system. So one of my last customers, when I was still a consultant, had 300 not documented RFC connections to the outside world. Not documented, not properly secured by authorization concepts, and under GDPR, but I'm not a lawyer, I would assume, well, that's a reason to get terrific fines. Because if I do not know why I have a connection to the outside world, why I'm transferring data and which data, I'm obviously incompliant. Up to my opinion, but as stated, I'm not a lawyer. Yeah, transmission control. Job control is especially important if you talk about any cloud scenario where we do have the data controller, the data processor inside. You have to control what your data processor is doing. Yes, SAP will act according to the contracts, to the legal requirements as your data processor in cloud. Still, you should trust us, but you should control us. If we are going wrong and you have never been controlling us, it's partly your guilt. So even if I love my company, I'm proud to be SAP, still the concept here is, as a controller, you have to control the processor. That's job control, availability control. Well, always a good idea to talk about data, disaster recovery and business continuity. And data separation is something I would like to highlight a bit more in a few minutes. Yeah, some examples. I will be a bit faster. Maybe you know how we deal with authentication authorizations. I want to make the point when it comes to disclosure control that we do have, since quite a while, read access logging in place. So if you are dealing with how SAP and the field very often names its sensitive personal data, you can use a mechanism where access to this data is locked. Effectively, we have been implementing all Article 9, Paragraph 1 special categories of personal data like religion, trade union membership, sexual preferences, health data, so that's something we have implemented, and in addition we implemented read access logging also for bank account data. Just to keep you informed on this, there is a standard functionality and there's also a custom development solution, UI read access logging. Purpose differentiation, as stated, purpose is one of the most important concepts when it comes to data protection and privacy. In the CCPA, we have a legal definition what under CCPA a purpose is. In GDPR, we do not have a statutory definition on that, but purpose is again and again used. So, for instance, you are only allowed to have data as long as you have a legitimate purpose. You shall have only that data that is linked with a legitimate purpose, and so on. So we do have purpose in a lot of places in GDPR. So you should be every time able to prove why you have the data and which entity in your organization has that data. So what we are providing is an opportunity to document in the system why you have the data and why and who with line organizational attributes and process organizational attributes, and now it's getting a bit abstract. Maybe it's a joke when I say abstract, because I'm already abstract. Anyhow, group of companies and SAP. As stated, there is no such thing as SAP has a purpose. We are more than 169 separate companies in a group of companies. And each of them has its own purpose, even if it is exactly the same business process, even if it is exactly the same application. So, for instance, when we talk about time recording, SAP Switzerland has an own purpose and own retention periods on time recording than SAP Germany or SAP SE. And that's important to differentiate between these companies. How to differentiate between several data controllers within a group of companies? Well, you are all aware that at least in finance we do have the company code. And the company code is usually the entity doing the own year-end closing, which is more or less exactly the same than the legal entity, and in data protection and privacy, the data controller. But you are also aware that the company code is not always existing. So you need to identify in all applications which organizational attributes are reflecting the legal entity. So you know the mapping structures in SAP Business Suite and SAP S/4HANA, that you have to relate a plant to a company code or a sales organization to a company code, that you have to link the distribution channel to the sales organization. So you need to create a structure that allows you to identify for each single piece of personal data who is the responsible data controller. But it's not only about the line organizational structure, it's also about the process. So I would imagine, but I'm not a lawyer, that there is a difference whether you are dealing with peppermint tea or with cough medicine. The simple reason why there is a difference technically is that with cough medicine you will have retention periods potentially of 30 years. With peppermint tea, 10 years in Germany. So there seems to be different legislation applicable, so it could make sense to differentiate between different business processes with different purposes. So creating an example, remaining with peppermint tea and cough medicine, what this effectively means when you do have in your group of companies having two legal entities doing comparable business, and you follow the concept of line organizational and process organizational attributes, you can attribute your data down to the technical level of company code, business partner types, sales order types, delivery types. So there needs to be a consistent approach to reflect which data we are talking about, and this finally is reflecting the purpose in the legislation. Shortly on CCPA, and again, the presenter's view. We do have a highly comparable approach under CCPA to talk about personal data. Personal information means information that identifies, relates to, describes, is capable of being associated with, or could reasonably linked directly or indirectly with a particular consumer or household. So it is more or less everything which identifies a person or can get linked to that person. So we see that we do have comparable definitions here, with one important difference. CCPA is on the consumer and not on the employee. Still, it's quite comparable as long as we talk about consumers. We do have definitions about business, where the CCPA is applicable depending on the cross revenue, depending on consumers. Here we do have the definition consumer, and we see, well, the consumer is a natural person who is a California resident, and that's the next important difference to the GDPR. CCPA is only applicable for Californian residents. GDPR is applicable for the processing of data of people which are in the European Union. So theoretically, if an American person is in Europe, GDPR would apply for that time. Then are some even comparable definitions. They talk about service provider, we talk about processor, and we do have some consumer rights in the CCPA, which are quite comparable to the ones we have seen in GDPR. So the first one is tell me what information you collected from me, categories of personal information, specific pieces of personal information. The business has to provide advanced information. We know that from GDPR. And the data subject has the right to get information on the personal data undergoing processing, the information itself, the categories and all that of the last 12 months. That's the difference. In Europe you have all the time, because it's all the data, but in California it's restricted to 12 months. Still, it's the same logically or technically whether you report on 12 months or until start of time. You have the right to delete personal data or to request the deletion of personal data. And now, well, in America they do have different concepts. Californian Consumer Privacy Act explicitly is dealing with the selling of personal data, and that you have the right to object that the company shall not sell your personal data. We do have in Europe more or less very hard opt-in requirements. In the States or in California it's more about opt-out. But finally, we consider CCPA as highly comparable with GDPR and requesting the same technical features as already introduced. I have been talking about the information retrieval framework. We have been talking about simplified blocking and deletion. And, well, simplified blocking and deletion, often shared. The simple idea is, and this is either in GDPR or CCPA the same. The simple idea is if you start collecting personal data, you have a predefined purpose, and any purpose ends as soon as the business ends. After the purpose is ended, you usually should consider a blocking period. So if, and this is fact, financial or tax legislation requires the residence of personal data due to audits and all that, you should consider that you block the data, that only financial auditors or tax auditors are allowed to access this data. And finally, you have to delete all personal data. That is something I skip. As stated, Ivona Luther is talking about a lot more about blocking and deletion of personal data, also in SAP Cloud Platform. Let's switch to the information retrieval framework. As stated, we do have an opportunity to fulfill the data subject request on personal data. That is the information retrieval framework, and here it is important to understand how this is working. We are talking about linking data. So we do have a mapping, for instance, from a user to a shopping cart, from the shopping cart potentially to a purchase order, and again the next mapping. So we're talking about completely mapped data. So we have been considering what to do with that mapping. We have been basing our approach on SAP Information Lifecycle Management objects, because there we cover already all personal data and just derived models and procedures to report on personal data like you would delete personal data. So in the first step, you do not know where the person is, then you see the ILM objects. It is already providing structure. You have the opportunity to group that structures and using afterwards in the data retrieval the links between the clusters. Important is you have to configure the information retrieval framework, because at SAP some quite conservative product owners are considering a lot of things as personal data normal human beings would never ever consider as personal data. So an item list in a purchase requisition is considered from us as personal data, because a conservative customer might also see that this way. Most customers will reduce the scope, and this is one of the reasons why you have to adapt that information retrieval framework models. Make sure that you're only reporting the data you want to report. And if you consider a line item list in a purchase requisition not as personal data, get rid of it. And you have to control the information retrieval, whether business secrecies of use would be shared or whether data subject rights of other data subjects would be touched from the reporting on that. We do have read access logging as an opportunity to check who has been accessing the data. That is also relevant under CCPA. We have covered this. I covered also what is part of our read access logging standard configuration. And finally, I want to inform that we are implementing in SAP Cloud Platform services, which allows, if used, to configure SAP Cloud Platform solutions already with all data protection and privacy services we assume as relevant. One of that is the data retention manager, which finally works with a comparable approach how to deal with personal data when it comes to retention or deletion. So the commonly used check procedure is: are we talking about personal data? If yes, do we have a purpose? If yes, do we have if no, do we have other retention periods like financial ones to be applied? What to do if retention periods are to be applied, and how to block and delete afterwards the personal data. And this would be my parforce run through data protection and privacy standard features. The basic message I need to place and I want to place is: since 2018, our board declared that in each of our products we are providing all technical mandatory features to allow you to become compliant. But it is you who is responsible to use it or not. We cannot configure a system by default and design completely meeting your demands, because I do not know in which business you are. I do not know whether your business is legitimate at all. All we can do is providing features, and we do it on the level of technically mandatory. A lot of features we are providing with additional solutions are relevant for additional licenses where it is no technical need, just a nice to have or a comfort functionality. We want to get license fees because Volker needs some more colored suits. That's the simple reason. I want to make you aware that we do have 2 o'clock digital business services lesson on services they are providing to help you to start such a project. This will take place in Theater 1. And with that, I am open for any question to answer, and I'm grateful that most of you are not have been fallen asleep. So there's a microphone. So if someone wants to raise questions, go ahead.
Thomas Steinheiser from T-Systems Switzerland. I have a question regarding Gigia. If a customer implements Gigia or now Data Cloud, what does that mean? What he has to do and what brings Gigia for him in regards to GDPR?
Depending on what services and products you are using in our C4 suite.
Yeah, for instance, the customer implementing the sales service, commerce, data cloud, marketing cloud, so all the customer experience suite.
Our C4HANA customer consent is designed, for instance, to support the handling of consents for marketing permissions. So it helps to prove that before you're sending newsletters that you have had the consent on the purpose to do so. So there are a lot of opportunities, especially in marketing, to link data processing to a consent. Currently, we are in close cooperation with the colleagues to get a more complete picture integrating between C4 and S4. From my perspective, being the product owner for S4 in data protection and privacy, we do have a basic consent repository in S4. And now we have to decide, together with our colleagues from C4, how to integrate that two solutions, because consent is even affecting blocking and deletion of personal data in an S4 instance. And this is something we are working on, but so far no statements what and when we will deliver something in that area.
Thanks.
So if there are no questions, continue your SAP TechEd learning experience using our SAP Learning Hub. You see that slide also in other presentations. Engage with our SAP TechEd community, access the replays, continue the conversation, not this evening on the party, because we should have party and no business conversations. Anyhow, check our blogs, check which more information we do have, which related learning journeys we provide, which TechEd sessions are also relevant, what public SAP websites we are providing, and doing some advertising. You might be aware of the fact that we have been providing, first in German, secondly in English, a book on GDPR, and SAP Ivona Luther is co-author of that book. And with that, I have to say thank you, ladies and gentlemen.